if you remove all the important things from our jobs, like being creative, exploring, learning, trying to do better, and so on and so forth, if you remove all those things, what's left? Having the same job as working in a car factory assembling parts? Is that the goal?
This is DevOps Paradox, episode number 197. Is your job stuck 20 years in the past? Welcome to DevOps Paradox. This is a podcast about random stuff in which we, Darren and Victor, pretend we know what we're talking about. Most of the time, we mask our ignorance by putting the word DevOps everywhere we can and mix it with random buzzwords like Kubernetes, serverless, CI/CD, team productivity, islands of happiness, and other fancy expressions that make us sound like we know what we're doing. Occasionally, we invite guests who do know something, but we do not do that often since they might make us look incompetent. The truth is out there, and there is no way we are going to find it. P.S. It's Darren reading this text and feeling embarrassed that Victor made me do it. Here are your hosts, Darren Pope and Victor Farsick. I saw a thread on Reddit recently that sort of piqued my interest and took me back about 20 years.
Only 20. Okay.
More than 20 actually, but 20. The Reddit post was titled, How to Properly Plan and Align on Big Weekend Maintenances.
By quitting.
Then question
That's mark. It. That's the episode. That's the answer.
By quitting. Okay. So I'll have the link to this, and we're going to be talking about something else, but they're sort of in the same vein. We're going to be titling this episode. It's not often that we know the title of episodes before we start, but it goes to what Victor just said. The title of this episode is Your Job Stuck 20 Years in the Past? And the link for that Reddit post and the link for a tweet that we're actually going to be, and assuming Twitter's still up, and it should be because I just checked as we're recording, that it's still up. It may not be by the time you're listening to it, though. We'll see. But the final paragraph in this was what took the cake, right? It's typical, right? You can, if you've read Phoenix Project, all of this is going to sound familiar, but there's a spreadsheet, there's people working in the same room, so on and so forth. But the final paragraph, before anyone asks, for many, many reasons outside the control of my department, it is not possible to change the way that we work. So for now, we'll still have monthly weekend maintenances. Within this context, we have to do our best. So going back to the original question, how to properly plan and align on big weekend maintenances across 5 to 15 teams. Full context. Assuming you don't want to quit, let's assume for a moment that it's me writing this. And no, it's not me writing this. Right? You're somebody that's in the last third of your career and you just don't want to go find a new job. Right? That's a fair thing. You just don't want to make the move. Let's say that you don't mind learning, you do all that stuff. It's like, you know what? Benefits are good. This is the crazy of the job. What do you do?
Okay, let me roll with that. Let's say that for whatever reason you're staying there, that's a good thing. What you do, right? I would say nothing. Because that last paragraph that says, for many, many reasons outside control of my department, it is not possible to change the way we work. And that includes planning. So that sentence basically tells me, hey, no matter what I do, we're going to do the same thing next week as we did week before and 10 years before, right? So, okay, and you're staying there, that's perfectly fine. That means whatever is the method for planning cannot be, if you're incapable of making changes, not because you're incapable, but it cannot be done, then just give up on changes, right? Because it's almost like a trick question. How do I change something like plan better weekend release without being able to change something? Am I becoming too philosophical now?
Well, I think that's what this episode is going to be. It's going to be very philosophical. Let me go ahead and mix in the tweet that I saw too, because the tweet can feed into this scenario that's happening. This tweet was from Mario Fusco. And Mario, if I messed up your last name, please forgive me. And he was retweeting somebody. And that's how I found it. And the tweet was actually from Alessandro Lasco. I'm sorry, Alessandro. I apologize. But bottom line is, Alessandro said, we're migrating to Java 8 next month. This tweet came out in December of 2022.
What's the current Java version? Just so that I'm in context. How old is the Java 8?
The two current LTSs are 11 and 17.
Okay, good. Okay.
8 is no longer officially, I think 8 was end of life. What was, okay, here. We'll just, Java 8 EOL. You know, everybody's just watching it here. We'll see. From an Oracle perspective, so let's assume Oracle Java SE, right? Just the normal whatever. The GAA date of 8 was March of 2014. There was premier support, right? So you had to pay to even get that kind of support through March of 2022. Here we are now. It's February 8th, 2023. So we're a year past the paid ending of support. So 8 has been dead, and people are just now going to 8.
I don't know what other answer I can give, but the same one as before. Our jobs are, I would say, very creative, right? They require creativity, require critical thinking, require figuring out things, and what the last thing it requires is actually just repetitive. Anybody can do that. My neighbor can do it type of work, right? If you remove all the important things from our jobs, like being creative, exploring, learning, trying to do better, and so on and so forth. If you remove all those things, what's left? Having the same job as working in a car factory assembling parts? Is that the goal?
That's what a weekend maintenance is, right?
It's, car maintenance. Yeah, exactly. Without being disrespectful, just to clarify, but kind of, is that the equivalent of what we're doing, car maintenance, for example?
Well, I was saying in the same thing here is like this, the whole setup you were saying is what the weekend maintenances show. It's like if it takes 5 or 15 teams to coordinate to get a release out, again, this is what we did in 2003, right? That was not abnormal in 2003. Heck, it wasn't even abnormal in 2009.
To begin with, in early 2000s, right? What we were doing was relatively limited in reach, right? The reason why we were releasing 20 years ago on weekends is because it's unlikely that many are using whatever we're having on weekends, right? So it's safer to do it on weekends than any other day. That was the main reason why it's weekend and not, let's say, Wednesday. But the world is not like that today. I don't think that there are many businesses today anymore where they say, hey, our users are 9 to 5, Monday to Friday, and nobody's using this thing over the weekend. I'm not saying that there couldn't be lower traffic, higher traffic, but simply it's not that extreme anymore for majority.
Right. Government sites you'll see go down on the weekends. Right.
So maybe if your government something, yes. So, I mean, I'm not saying that there isn't, but it's much smaller number of those cases to begin with.
So the reason why I brought that tweet in is there are people just now upgrading to something that has already been end of lifed.
I cannot simply understand that at all. My brain cannot wrap around it. I can understand. I do not support. I do not agree. But I can understand why somebody does not upgrade something for 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. I don't agree, but I can understand the reasons behind it. Now, the reasons for upgrading from something into something that is already end of life, that sounds like a tremendous waste of time. And I'm pretty sure that somebody would come up now and say, yeah, because whatever we have, the changes to Java, I don't know which one, are so much smaller than to newer Java, but it's already end of life. If your goal is to reduce the amount of work that you need to do over a longer period of time, if that's your goal, then upgrading it to relatively new Java version means that you can now not upgrade for next 10 years. Again, not that something you should do, right? But at least you're safer. Maybe more work involved, but safer.
And I want to clear up what I just said for just a moment, looking at some other data. So active support for Java 8 expired last March 2022, right? So I will say that. But to clarify, there is security support through the end of 2030. So another almost 8 years in front of us. But here's where it gets worse. You ready for this? Java 11 released on September 2018, 4 years ago. Ballpark. Its active support expires, which I consider end of life, September of 2023. 8 months from now.
It's business, man.
What world are we living in, right?
Basically, essentially, somebody is earning money by prolonging the misery and making it intentionally bad for companies in the future, right? Because the reason, I wouldn't be surprised that the reason why that company is switching to Java 8, no, I'm not, I don't know even what I'm talking about. But very often, people upgrade only when they stop getting support. I mean, that's okay if you're talking about a year, two, couple of years, right? But if you're talking about longer period of time, whomever is giving that support is getting money and damaging that company because prolonging the misery, right? Kind of making it even worse for that company to do anything in the future, because the longer you wait, the harder it gets.
So we've been all doom and gloom up to this point. What can we say to what appears to be, again, people stuck 10, 20 years ago? How can they help maybe move the needle, even if it's just a little bit?
I honestly don't know, partly because I spent years, a long time ago, in one of the companies, staying there, trying, basically almost all my effort. I wasn't doing anything productive, but trying to move the needle, and failed. It didn't work for me. So I'm not a good one to give example on over that subject.
So let's talk about your failure. What were the things that you tried? Because just because they failed for you 10 years ago, right, doesn't mean that those same strategies may not work in these types of companies that now have, 10 years, but they're still stuck in the past.
Actually, more than 10 years, closer to 15. But yeah, I don't know. I tried everything. Everything, to explain, convince, teach testers to write some code, any code, failed. To teach, explain, convince developers to write tests themselves, failed. Any type of reorganization, completely failed. I mean, I've mentioned testers only, but that applied to almost everybody else. Do better, faster. Agile at that time was a big thing. It all failed. But here's the catch. Not all of those things were successful. On the surface, I got the buy-in from people at the bottom. I got the buy-in from people at the top. I implemented the changes. Everybody was happy. But that's how it looked on the surface. And then you spend a couple of more months and you see, no, actually everything is exactly the same. And then you try again. Get the buy-in. Everybody wants it. Excellent. Everybody happy. Excellent. Are we doing it? Yes. Couple of months later, no. And the only explanation I have for that is that part of the company left, part of the company stayed. And those who stayed had a really, not everybody, of course, but many of them had really, really good incentive not to change. They stayed for a reason.
What was that reason?
Because it's comfortable, because they have valuable knowledge within the context. They have good positions and so on, and very importantly, very often couldn't get those positions outside of that environment. So it's almost like you're in a prison cell, right? And you're the boss, not in a prison cell, in prison, right? You're the boss of the gang. You're not free. You cannot go out. You cannot experience the real world. You're not better than if you're outside necessarily. Actually, you might be even better than if you're outside, right? Because inside you have the power. You're a cellmate, but everybody respects you. You have your business. You're smuggling drugs or whatever you're doing. Nobody can touch you, all that stuff. The life in prison is not better than outside, but for you it might be, because you have nothing outside.
But inside you have control, influence, and you believe that is freedom.
Exactly. So what do? And then some yuppie, hippie director comes and says, oh, we're going to change this. We're going to remove the walls. We're going to not have guards in this prison and stuff like that, right? To you, as the top dog among cellmates, that's not good.
That scares you, right? Because now you no longer have those four walls constraining you.
You're inside. You don't want to go out precisely because you see yourself having value only inside the prison. But it's not only inside the prison, but inside that system. Anywhere else, you don't see yourself as having value, right? Being a top dog anymore. So what looked like I actually thrive within those walls, in reality is I actually thrive within this environment, within this process, within this everything, right? It's not only that the walls are what make you top dog, right? So don't change it. This is a very philosophical episode, man.
We don't do these very often, but I think you're right. And it's interesting. Now, I've never been in prison. Victor, I'm assuming you've never been in prison. So we're taking all of this from the angle of watching movies.
From movies,
huh?
Yeah.
From movies, TV. Okay. But I think it lands, because if you have been in a place long enough and you actually have moved up the food chain to have some power, maybe not top dog power, but, mid dog power, it's hard to give that up.
Exactly. That's what was happening in this specific company. Now, I'm not even generalizing. The company I worked at 15, almost 20 years ago, that's what happening. That's what was happening. Who had opportunities, took those opportunities and went somewhere else. And by the way, we didn't have high rotation, so not many left, right? But some did. Those who stayed, it was almost like working in a government institution, right? You have a guaranteed job. You know things that nobody else knows. You're well paid. Why would you change?
Right? Yeah. Why would you change? You don't have a whole lot of pressure. You come in, you show up at 9 o'clock, you punch out at 5 o'clock, you get all your holidays, you get all of your vacation.
You know what? Now when I think about it, that specific company, I think, had more what I believe we call 10x coders than any other company I worked at. People who are so good that nobody can get even close to them, right? There are many of those, but so good for this specific thing, right? So it's not that necessarily, hey, I'm better than anybody else in a company. But this nobody can do as well as I do.
So did they churn out a lot faster? Like, were those 10Xers in there for...
No. They were the people who stayed.
Who stayed?
Yeah.
See, that's a little backwards from what we normally hear, right? Normally the 10Xers are in, do the thing, get bored, and move on to the next thing.
Yeah, but I'm referring to different 10x. I'm referring to the 10x from perception of the company, right? This guy, he's been working on that system. He's been working on Java 3 for 20 years. Nobody knows Java 3 as he does. So that's a 10x within the confines of that organization. Maybe not even organization, that specific project. He's not 10x outside. He cannot leave. Because who needs Java 3? I said 3. I don't know whether 3
He said 3.
exists.
3 is not a real thing, but that's fine. It went from 1 to 6, but that's okay. Or 1 to 5 to 6. It's interesting that so your 10x is in context of 10x within the four walls. If they were to walk outside the four walls, would they even be a 1/10x?
Yeah, because you're a principal software engineer or whatever is very high position, right? Decently good paycheck, not Silicon Valley good, but kind of good paycheck. You're junior outside.
Let's play it the other side. So how do we tell people to get out of these situations? Right? The company that's just now upgrading to something that has already been end-of-lifed, or the company that is still stuck on weekend maintenance. Now, I'm not saying that weekend maintenance isn't necessary. Sometimes it is, because you're paying off tech debt and will be paying off tech debt for the next 30 years.
I think it depends on certain things, right? First of all, how old are you? I completely understand after a certain age, you just want to do your job, go back home, kiss your children good night, and those things, right? I understand it completely. Now, my advice usually goes, even though I rarely specify it like that, if you're young, that's when you're hungry, right? That's when you do want to have opportunities to be a real top dog, right? Not only perceived within an organization. That's when you don't stay in a company that does weekend maintenance. Over 40, yeah, weekend maintenance, cool, why not? And I sound skeptic, right? But or negative. I'm honestly saying, yeah, why not?
But then, as time has moved along, now that we're in 2023, think about photos from the 1800s, throughout the 1900s and into the 2000s. When you would take a picture of somebody when they were 50, and if you were to take a picture of somebody that's 50 today, like 20 years ago, we'll stick with our 20-year number. A person that was 50 20 years ago, take a picture, and now you have a person that's 50 now, depending on a lot of, life scenarios and everything else. But more than likely, that person that you have, the 50-year-old person that you have the picture taken of now, is going to look a lot younger than that person 20 years ago. What I'm saying is basically life is getting longer. So in my case, I'm still willing to learn. So to me, your 40 number that you just threw out there, which is fine. And again, my kid's married, gone, just me and my wife right now. I'm willing to go to 60, 65 because I love the learning. I don't mind picking up new things, but I know I'm an oddball.
Yeah, but the reason why I said 40 is that I made the assumption that, let's say you started your career when you're 20, real job, and you're 40 now, and you have much more experience than 20 years ago in the things that you started doing and you're still doing since 20 years ago, right? I'm not talking about a person who is 40, 50 or whatever and actually was to some extent adapting with times. I'm talking that, hey, I joined this company when I was 20. I'm still doing the same thing as 20 years ago. Just I'm much more experienced in that thing, but the same thing. Not likely that you're going to now go for a hipster job where you compete with 16-year-old something telling you about MongoDB or whatever is the thing today, right?
Right. No, I agree with you on that. And by the way, Mongo is not the thing today. Nothing against the Mongo people, but that was 10 years ago. So Mongo was the thing.
I'm one of those.
It's the open AIs of the year. Those are the now things. So what do you think about this? Again, the links to both the Reddit and the tweet are going to be down in the show notes. I would advise you to take a look at them. By the way, there were a couple of comments on both of them. I want to call out the comments that were on the Reddit thread, or a couple of them. One of them goes to what you were saying. Assuming it's true, your firm cannot change how they work, parenthetically, which is an invalid assumption. You can and should change how you work. Get a new job.
That's in line with the sentence that I said many, many times. You either change the company or you change the company. Meaning, you either change how a company works or you change the company where you work. Those are the two options. And here's what I learned from that company that I was talking about, where I worked long time ago. The most important thing, I think that you should always try by changing how a company works. You should always try that first. But you need to time box it. Not to a month, nobody can do any, but a year, couple of years, whatever the period is, right? And say, okay, this is the time box. After this date, I'm not there anymore. If this does not work. So you have very clear conscience. You can say, I did my best, I tried. It's not that I just said, oh, this is bad, I'm going somewhere else. No. I tried.
And the final comment that I want to call out is, vote with your feet to a place that values your time and your time off, assuming the weekends are your time off.
There is that last comment. How about a proper issue tracking system with milestone releases? That's the bad advice. That's actually how can we mask the problem with half-ass solution? Kind of like, how can we give impression that we are actually proving something without really changing the core of the issue?
Create another layer of work on top of the work to have more work. That's the answer, isn't it? Isn't that the answer? Isn't that what they teach in business school? I don't know. I didn't go to business school. All right, so what do you think? You may agree, you may disagree. Any of your thoughts, go over to the Slack workspace. There's a podcast channel. You'll see a post for episode 197. You can leave your comments there. We hope this episode was helpful to you. If you want to discuss it or ask a question, please reach out to us. Our contact information and a link to the Slack workspace are at devopsparadox.com/contact. If you subscribe through Apple Podcast, be sure to leave us a review there. That helps other people discover this podcast. Go sign up right now at devopsparadox.com to receive an email whenever we drop the latest episode. Thank you for listening to DevOps Paradox.